March 15, 1943, 11:43 a.m. Metropolitan General Hospital, Philadelphia. Nurse Lenore Fairchild stood in the middle of the staff conference room, and 42 people stared at her as though she'd already ceased to exist. Chief of Medicine Dr. Harlan Pemberton held patient Virgil Kowalski's medical chart in his hands and spoke slowly, distinctly, with pauses between each word. "You administered the wrong dosage. You gave Mr. Kowalski 500 milligrams of digitalis when the order specified 50. The result was acute cardiac toxicity, emergency intervention, and cardiac arrest lasting 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The patient survived by sheer luck. You've worked here 18 years, Miss Fairchild, and I cannot fathom how such negligence could occur." Lenore said nothing. She knew the truth. The dosage error was his, Pemberton's, from the previous evening when he'd covered her shift and personally written the order. She'd seen the medication log that morning, seen his handwriting, seen the original entry for 500 milligrams before it was scratched out and rewritten as 50 milligrams, with her initials forged beside it. But 42 people stared at her, and not one said a word. Pemberton continued. Quote 1. The conference room was absolutely silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Lenore was 43 years old, 18 of which she'd spent at Metropolitan General. She'd arrived in 1925, fresh from nursing school at Temple University, a 25-year-old woman with top marks and an unshakable belief that nursing was a calling, not merely employment. Those were different times, the roaring 20s, before the Depression, before the war, when Philadelphia's hospitals were expanding and young nurses were in demand. Her first supervisor was head nurse Millicent Drummond, a stern but fair woman who'd trained during the Great War and brought military precision to civilian medicine. Millicent repeated constantly, ___, quote __2 ___. Lenore learned quickly. Within a year, she was working the cardiology ward independently. Within 3, she'd been promoted to charge nurse. Within 5, she was training new graduates. She memorized every protocol, every drug interaction, every emergency procedure. She could calculate morphine dosages in her head, could identify heart arrhythmias by sound alone, could spot sepsis before laboratory results confirmed it. In 1933, she received a commendation from the Pennsylvania Department of Health for exemplary service and professional excellence, after she'd identified a contaminated batch of saline solution before it could be distributed hospital-wide. In 1938, she was awarded the hospital's Distinguished Service Medal after working 72 consecutive hours during a diphtheria outbreak, refusing to leave her post even when other nurses collapsed from exhaustion. Colleagues respected her. Patients wrote letters of gratitude addressed personally to her. Administrators cited her as a model employee in training manuals. She never arrived late, never refused additional shifts even when her feet ached and her back screamed for rest, never raised her voice even with the most difficult patients. She knew by heart the dosing protocols for every medication used in the hospital: digitalis, morphine, atropine, strychnine, cocaine solutions, ether preparations. She could distinguish drug vials by touch alone in poor lighting, could read physicians' illegible handwriting when others gave up, never confused orders even during the chaos of emergency admissions. 18 years without a single reprimand, without a single patient complaint, without a single medication error. And now 42 people looked at her with eyes that said, quote _4 __. Dr. Harlan Pemberton became Chief of Medicine at Metropolitan General in 1941, just months before Pearl Harbor transformed American medicine overnight. He was 40 years old, with a sterling career behind him. Graduated summa cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine in 1924. Residency at Massachusetts General Hospital under legendary cardiologist Dr. Samuel Levine. Published research on cardiac glycosides that appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Position as department head at Pennsylvania Hospital before being recruited to Metropolitan General. He had connections at the American Medical Association, recommendations from influential physicians, a wife from a prominent Philadelphia family, 3 children in private schools, a house in Chestnut Hill. He was tall, distinguished, confident. He wore expensive suits even during wartime rationing, drove a Packard when gasoline was scarce, hosted dinner parties for hospital board members at his home. He knew how to say the right things at board meetings, how to navigate hospital politics during wartime when resources were limited and government contracts were essential, how to secure funding and equipment when other hospitals were struggling. Patients adored him. He was charming, attentive, reassuring, with a deep voice that conveyed absolute authority and competence. Colleagues respected him. He was professionally competent, published regularly, brought prestige to the institution. But Lenore saw what others missed. She saw him blame subordinates for his mistakes. She saw him claim credit for others' ideas. She'd watched him present Dr. Holloway's innovative cardiac monitoring protocol as his own at a medical conference. She saw him order procedures without checking for contraindications, rushed, impatient, convinced of his own infallibility. She saw him alter medical records after adverse outcomes, changing dates, modifying dosages, rewriting notes. She remained silent because everyone else did, because he was chief of medicine and she was a nurse, because in 1940s America, a doctor's word carried infinitely more weight than truth, and a woman who challenged a man in authority was labeled difficult, emotional, unstable. March 14, 1943, evening. Lenore was scheduled to work the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., as she'd done thousands of times over 18 years. But at 6:20 p.m., she received an urgent telephone call from her neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski. No relation to the patient, an unfortunate coincidence. Her mother had suffered a diabetic crisis. Her insulin schedule had been disrupted. Her blood sugar had dropped dangerously. She was confused and sweating and unable to stand. Lenore's mother was 71 years old, had been diabetic for 15 years, required precise insulin administration twice daily. Lenore called the hospital immediately, spoke to the nursing supervisor, explained the situation. She'd never missed a shift in 18 years, never called in sick, never asked for special accommodations. The supervisor understood. Dr. Pemberton was already in the building for an evening consultation. He volunteered to cover her shift. He occasionally did this to maintain his reputation as an accessible administrator, to demonstrate that despite his position, he was still willing to do the work of ordinary staff. It was calculated magnanimity, performed for an audience. At 11:17 p.m., Virgil Kowalski, a 56-year-old machinist from the Philadelphia Navy Yard, was admitted to the cardiac ward with chest pain. He'd been working a double shift, 16 hours, fabricating components for destroyer escorts. The war effort demanded constant production, and men like Kowalski pushed themselves beyond reasonable limits because that's what patriotism required in 1943. The pain had started around 10:30 p.m., radiating down his left arm, accompanied by shortness of breath and nausea. Classic cardiac symptoms. His supervisor had called an ambulance. Kowalski arrived conscious, frightened, apologizing for the inconvenience. Working men in that era viewed medical care as an extravagance, not a right. Pemberton examined him, noted the symptoms, reviewed his history. Mild hypertension, smoker, family history of heart disease. Standard case. Standard treatment. Bed rest, oxygen, cardiac monitoring, and a supportive dose of digitalis to strengthen heart contractions. 50 milligrams was the appropriate dose for a man Kowalski's size with his symptoms. But Pemberton was rushed. He had plans. A late dinner meeting with 2 hospital board members and a representative from the War Production Board who was touring Philadelphia medical facilities. The meeting was important for securing government contracts, for ensuring Metropolitan General received priority allocation of medical supplies during wartime shortages. Pemberton was already 40 minutes late. He went to the medication cabinet in the cardiac ward's procedure room. The cabinet was organized alphabetically: morphine, atropine, digitalis, strychnine, cocaine solutions. The digitalis section contained 2 bottles, both labeled digitalis purpurea extract, both from the same pharmaceutical supplier. One contained 50 milligram tablets in a brown glass bottle. The other contained 500 milligram tablets in an identical brown glass bottle. The only difference was a small label, white text on brown glass, difficult to read in the procedure room's dim lighting. The hospital used the higher dose for critical cases, the lower dose for standard treatment. Standard protocol required checking the label twice, comparing it against the written order, having a second staff member verify. Pemberton grabbed a bottle without checking carefully. He was thinking about the dinner meeting, about the War Production Board representative, about securing funding. He shook out 5 tablets, crushed them with a mortar and pestle, dissolved them in sterile water, drew the solution into a syringe. 500 milligrams per tablet. 5 tablets. 2,500 milligrams total. 50 times the prescribed dose. A lethal amount for a patient with Kowalski's condition. He administered the injection himself. Didn't call a nurse, didn't ask for verification, didn't document the administration immediately. He told Kowalski the medication would help, told him to rest, told him a nurse would check on him in 30 minutes. Then, Pemberton left for his dinner meeting. At 11:47 p.m., Virgil Kowalski's heart began to fail. The massive digitalis overdose was causing severe cardiac toxicity, dangerous arrhythmias, plummeting blood pressure, electrical chaos in the heart muscle. He called for a nurse. The night nurse, a young woman named Patricia Brennan who'd graduated only 2 years earlier, found him gray-faced, sweating, gasping for breath. She called for the resident physician, Dr. Marcus Chen, who'd been sleeping in the on-call room. Dr. Chen arrived within minutes, examined Kowalski, recognized digitalis toxicity immediately. He ordered emergency treatment, activated charcoal to bind remaining drug in the stomach, atropine to counter cardiac effects, calcium gluconate to stabilize the heart muscle. He sent Patricia to check the medication log, to find out exactly how much digitalis Kowalski had received. Patricia ran to the procedure room, found the empty bottle on the counter. 500 milligram tablets. Her hands started shaking. She checked the medication log. The entry was in Dr. Pemberton's handwriting. __, quote, _7__. But the bottle on the counter told a different story. She brought both the log and the bottle to Dr. Chen. He looked at them, looked at his patient, understood immediately what had happened. Kowalski's condition deteriorated rapidly. At 12:41 a.m., now March 15th, his heart stopped. Cardiac arrest. Doctor, Chen began chest compressions immediately, ordered epinephrine, ordered electrical defibrillation when the hospital's new defibrillator unit could be wheeled into the room. The defibrillator was recent technology. Metropolitan General had acquired one only 6 months earlier, one of the first hospitals in Philadelphia to have the equipment. 3 shocks. No response. 4 minutes of compressions. Another shock. Finally, at 12:47 a.m., Kowalski's heart resumed beating. He was alive, barely. Dr. Chen stabilized him, transferred him to the intensive monitoring unit, began documenting everything meticulously. He noted the discrepancy between the medication log and the empty bottle. He saved the bottle as evidence. He wrote everything down while it was fresh. At 1:30 a.m., Dr. Pemberton returned from his dinner meeting. He was in good spirits. The War Production Board representative had been impressed, had promised to expedite Metropolitan General's application for priority medical supplies. He went to check on the cardiac ward, routine practice after evening meetings. He found Dr. Chen in the nursing station completing his documentation. Dr. Chen explained what had happened. Patient Kowalski, cardiac arrest, digitalis toxicity, the discrepancy between the log and the bottle. Pemberton's face went pale. He asked to see the documentation. Dr. Chen showed him. Pemberton looked at the empty 500 milligram bottle, looked at his own handwriting in the medication log indicating 50 milligrams, understood immediately that he'd nearly killed a patient and that the evidence of his error was documented by a meticulous resident physician. He made a decision in that moment, a choice that would define the next 7 years of multiple lives. He told Dr. Chen that he'd check into the discrepancy, that there must be some explanation, that they should be careful about making accusations before all facts were clear. His tone was authoritative, avuncular, slightly patronizing, the tone of a senior physician cautioning an over-enthusiastic resident about jumping to conclusions. Dr. Chen, 27 years old and only 2 years out of medical school, deferred to authority. Pemberton took the empty bottle, said he'd investigate personally, dismissed Dr. Chen to get some rest. After Dr. Chen left, Pemberton went to the procedure room. He found the medication log. He studied his own handwriting. Then, he made another choice. He took a razor blade, standard equipment in procedure rooms, used for opening sealed medication packages, and carefully scratched out the __quote _8 _ in _quote _9 _, making it illegible. He rewrote it as _quote _10 in slightly different ink, making it appear as though the original order had been for the higher dose. Then, he practiced writing Lenore Fairchild's initials. He'd seen her handwriting thousands of times over the years. She had distinctive initials, a flowing __quote _11 that was recognizable. He practiced on scratch paper until he could approximate it reasonably well. Not perfectly, but well enough to create doubt. It wasn't perfect, but it was plausible. Enough to shift blame. Enough to protect himself. The next morning, March 15th, Lenore arrived for her day shift at 6:45 a.m. She always arrived 15 minutes early, used the time to review overnight reports, check on patients, prepare for the day. She went to the cardiac ward, found Patricia Brennan completing her night shift documentation. Patricia looked exhausted, traumatized. She told Lenore what had happened: Mr. Kowalski, the cardiac arrest, the digitalis toxicity, the confusion about the dosage. Lenore went immediately to the medication log. She saw the entry, her initials, but she hadn't been in the hospital. She looked closely. The initials were slightly wrong, the pressure different, the formation not quite matching her natural hand movement. She went to the procedure room, checked the medication bottles, checked the disposal bin. She found the discarded 500 milligram bottle that Pemberton hadn't noticed, still with residue. She understood what had happened. She went to find Dr. Chen to ask him exactly what he'd documented. Dr. Chen showed her his notes, meticulous, detailed, time-stamped. The evidence was clear. She took the notes to the nursing supervisor, explained the situation. The supervisor looked uncomfortable, told her to wait, went to call Dr. Pemberton. At 9:30 a.m., Lenore was summoned to the chief of medicine's office. Pemberton was there, along with the hospital administrator Wallace Brennan. They asked her to explain what had happened. She told them the truth. She hadn't been on duty. Dr. Pemberton had covered her shift. The initials in the log were forged. She had the discarded bottle as evidence. Pemberton listened calmly. Then he expressed surprise and disappointment. He said he understood she was trying to avoid responsibility, but falsely accusing a supervisor was a serious matter. He said he had witnesses who'd seen her in the building that evening. He said the handwriting analysis would prove the initials were hers. He said he was shocked and saddened that a nurse of her experience would make such a grave error and then attempt to deflect blame. Wallace Brennan listened to both accounts, looked at the evidence, made his decision. A doctor with 20 years of spotless reputation versus a nurse making extraordinary accusations. The choice was obvious. He ordered a formal disciplinary hearing. The hearing was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. that same day. Speed was essential. Pemberton wanted this resolved before too many people started asking questions, before Dr. Chen's detailed documentation could be widely circulated, before anyone examined the evidence too carefully. The hearing took place in the conference room, the same room where this story began. Present were Chief of Medicine Dr. Harlan Pemberton, Director of Nursing Mrs. Constance Rutherford, Hospital Administrator, Mr. Wallace Brennan, Union Representative, Mr. Eugene Rafferty, and Hospital Board Observer, Mrs. Beatrice Vandermeer. 42 hospital employees crowded into the room and the hallway outside. Word had spread quickly. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Lenore was questioned. She answered calmly, precisely. No, she had not worked the night of March 14th. Yes, Dr. Pemberton had covered her shift. No, she had not administered medication to Mr. Kowalski. Yes, she had seen the altered entry in the medication log that morning. No, she could not explain how her initials appeared beside the order except that they were forged. Pemberton listened without interrupting. Then he produced the medication log. Showed the entry, her initials clear as day. Lenore looked carefully. The initials were forged, skillfully but not perfectly. The downstroke on the L was too heavy, the connecting stroke too hesitant. She said, "Those are not my initials. The formation is wrong." Pemberton responded smoothly, "We have a handwriting analysis from a certified graphologist. The initials are conclusively yours." He placed a document on the table, an expert's report, notarized, dated, signed by a Dr. Edmund Wexler, certified document examiner. Lenore had never heard of Dr. Wexler. Neither had anyone else in the room. But the document looked official, carried a notary seal, included technical terminology about stroke patterns and pressure points. Pemberton had prepared everything meticulously, in advance, with forethought. Lenore tried again. Pemberton nodded sympathetically. Mrs. Rutherford added quietly, "Another unfortunate coincidence of names." Lenore knew this was impossible. She'd been at home all evening. But Kozlowski was nodding from the back of the room, looking uncomfortable but committed to his statement. She asked, "What exactly did Mr. Kozlowski see?" Pemberton answered, "That's immaterial to this hearing. The fact remains, you made a critical medication error that nearly killed a patient. The evidence is clear. Your initials are in the log. Witnesses place you in the building. The question is whether Metropolitan General can continue to employ someone who represents such a danger to patients." The hearing lasted 37 minutes. The decision was foregone. The union representative, Eugene Rafferty, tried to argue for due process, for additional investigation, for allowing Lenore time to gather evidence in her defense. He was overruled. The vote was taken. Unanimous decision to terminate. Mrs. Rutherford wouldn't meet Lenore's eyes as she voted. Wallace Brennan voted without hesitation. Even Mrs. Vandermeer, the board observer who'd been brought in specifically to ensure fairness, voted to terminate. The official reason? __quote _21 __. The personnel file was stamped. __quote _22 __. The phrasing was deliberately harsh. In 1943, with America at war and jobs plentiful in war industries, a dismissal for cause from a hospital was career-ending in healthcare, but not economically devastating. She could find other work. But it destroyed professional reputation irrevocably. Lenore signed the separation papers with a steady hand. She surrendered her identification badge, the same badge she'd worn for 18 years, now dulled and scratched from constant use. She surrendered her white uniform, freshly laundered that morning, starched and pressed as always. She surrendered her nursing equipment, the stethoscope she'd bought with her first paycheck in 1925, the hemostats that had belonged to Millicent Drummond, the pen her mother had given her when she graduated nursing school. She cleared out her locker in the nurse's changing room. 18 years of accumulated small possessions, an extra pair of shoes, a spare sweater, photographs of colleagues from hospital Christmas parties, commendation letters from grateful patients, the 1933 certificate from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, the 1938 Distinguished Service Medal. She packed everything into a cardboard box. She walked through the corridors one last time. Colleagues avoided her eyes. Some looked sympathetic but said nothing. Others looked judgmental, already convinced of her guilt because authority had declared it so. She left Metropolitan General at 2:20 p.m. on March 15, 1943. It was raining, a cold, steady March rain that soaked through her coat within minutes. She stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital entrance, holding her cardboard box, watching people come and go. Ambulances arriving with patients, doctors striding in with confident purpose, nurses chatting during shift changes. The hospital continued functioning as though nothing had happened, as though 18 years of her life hadn't just been erased. She walked to the trolley stop, rode home in silence, climbed the stairs to her apartment. Her mother was resting, stable now after the previous night's crisis. Lenore put the cardboard box in the hall closet. She didn't open it again for 7 years. For 3 months, she couldn't find work in healthcare. She applied to 17 hospitals in Philadelphia and surrounding counties. All rejected her immediately upon seeing the dismissal notation. Terminated for cause, professional misconduct, was a brand that couldn't be removed, a scarlet letter in the medical community. She tried for positions as a nursing aide at smaller clinics, refused. She tried for school nurse positions with the Philadelphia Public Schools, denied without interview. She tried for work at veterans' hospitals, thinking the wartime nursing shortage might make them less particular. They had standards too. She even tried at a psychiatric facility in Delaware County, a place known for accepting marginal candidates. They turned her away. She applied to be a laboratory assistant, a medical records clerk, even a hospital laundress. Nothing. The word had spread through Philadelphia's interconnected medical community. Harlan Pemberton's version of events had become the official narrative. She was the nurse who'd nearly killed a patient through negligence, then had the audacity to blame her supervisor. Her savings dwindled rapidly. She'd been prudent over 18 years, had saved consistently, but had never accumulated significant wealth. Nurses weren't well paid, even experienced ones. Her mother's medical expenses consumed much of what she had. Insulin was expensive. Doctor visits cost money. The diabetic diet required foods that were hard to obtain during wartime rationing. Her father had died in 1939 from a stroke, leaving no insurance, minimal savings. Her husband had left in 1936 after 10 years of marriage, couldn't tolerate her shift work, her constant absences, her exhaustion, her dedication to a profession he considered beneath someone of her intelligence. Quote, 24, he'd said before leaving. You could have been something. They'd had no children. Her irregular schedule had made pregnancy difficult, and after 3 miscarriages, they'd stopped trying. Lenore lived alone with her mother in a small 2-bedroom apartment on Rittenhouse Street in the Germantown neighborhood. The rent was $32 per month. Her savings were nearly gone. In June 1943, she saw a small advertisement in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Pharmacy assistant needed. Experience preferred. Apply Cheltenham Pharmacy, Germantown Avenue. She went the next day. The pharmacy was small, wedged between a bakery and a shoe repair shop in a working-class neighborhood. The owner was Mrs. Edith Haverford, a 60-year-old widow who'd been running the pharmacy since her husband's death in 1938. Edith was a pharmacist herself. Unusual for women of her generation, she'd fought hard for her degree in 1907 when pharmacy schools rarely admitted women. She was practical, unsentimental, shrewd. She looked at Lenore's application, saw the nursing background, saw the dismissal notation. She asked directly, "What happened at Metropolitan General?" Lenore decided to tell the truth. Complete truth. She explained the entire situation. Pemberton's error, the forged documentation, the fabricated witnesses, the impossible choice between accepting blame or being branded a liar. Edith listened without interrupting. When Lenore finished, Edith said, quote, she hired Lenore on the spot. The salary was $55 per month, officially part-time, 20 hours per week, but actually closer to full-time. It was less than half what Lenore had earned at Metropolitan General, but it was income. It was employment. It was dignity. Cheltenham Pharmacy served a quiet neighborhood, mostly elderly residents living on small pensions, young families struggling through wartime rationing, shift workers from nearby factories. The clientele wasn't wealthy, but they were loyal. Lenore worked the front counter, filled prescriptions under Edith's supervision, provided consultations about medication usage, dispensed over-the-counter remedies, advised customers about drug interactions. Her medical knowledge proved invaluable. She could explain why certain medications couldn't be taken with alcohol, what foods to avoid while taking sulfa drugs, How to recognize early signs of allergic reactions. Customers began specifically requesting her assistance. "Is Miss Fairchild working today?" they'd ask. __quote _30 __. Edith watched her work and saw something rare. Someone who treated pharmacy not as retail business but as clinical practice. Someone who asked about patients' other medications, their symptoms, their medical history before dispensing anything. Someone who caught potential problems before they became emergencies. One afternoon in July 1943, an elderly man came in with a prescription for digitalis. Coincidentally, the same drug that had destroyed her career. The prescription was written by a different physician, not Pemberton. Dosage: 250 milligrams daily. The patient was small, thin, probably no more than 110 pounds. Lenore checked his previous prescription records. He was already taking another heart medication, quinidine. The combination was dangerous. Quinidine increased digitalis toxicity risk, especially at high doses. She called the prescribing physician, explained the concern. The physician had missed the interaction, thanked her profusely, reduced the digitalis dose to 100 milligrams. The elderly man never knew how close he'd come to the same fate as Virgil Kowalski. Edith saw the entire interaction and understood exactly what kind of employee she'd hired. That evening, she increased Lenore's salary to $70 per month and made the position officially full-time. Lenore's life became rigid routine, carefully structured to leave no room for emotion or reflection. She woke every morning at 5:45 a.m., made breakfast for her mother, controlled portions, calculated carbohydrates for diabetic management. Administered her mother's morning insulin injection, precisely measured, carefully timed. Helped her mother dress and settle in her chair by the window. Tidied the apartment. Left for work at 7:30 a.m. Walked to the trolley stop on Chelton Avenue, rode to Germantown Avenue, walked 3 blocks to the pharmacy. Arrived at 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes before opening. Spent those 15 minutes reviewing overnight prescriptions, checking inventory, organizing the work area. Opened the pharmacy at 8:30. Worked until 6 p.m. Lunch was 30 minutes at 12:30, eaten in the back room, usually a sandwich she'd packed that morning, fruit if rationing allowed, water. Returned home by 7 p.m. Prepared dinner. Administered her mother's evening insulin. Helped her mother to bed. Washed dishes. Prepared the next day's meals. Read pharmaceutical journals or medical textbooks until 10 p.m. Went to bed. The same routine, 6 days per week. Sundays were for laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping, and accompanying her mother to church. Lenore herself had stopped attending after the dismissal, couldn't stomach the hymns about justice and divine mercy. The war continued. News from Europe, from the Pacific. Rationing intensified. Sugar, butter, meat, gasoline. The pharmacy struggled to maintain inventory as pharmaceutical manufacturing shifted to military priorities. Penicillin became nearly impossible to obtain for civilian use. Morphine was reserved for military hospitals. Even aspirin was sometimes scarce. Lenore learned to compound medications from raw ingredients, reviving techniques that had been common before mass manufacturing. She made cough syrups from glycerin and herbal extracts, ointments from lanolin and sulfur, tonics from iron salts and vitamins. Customers appreciated her resourcefulness during shortages. The neighborhood came to depend on her expertise. Meanwhile, at Metropolitan General Hospital, Dr. Harlan Pemberton thrived. In 1944, he published an article in the American Journal of Cardiology about emergency treatment protocols for cardiac arrest, based largely on Dr. Marcus Chen's meticulous documentation from the Kowalski case, though Dr. Chen's name appeared only in small print in the acknowledgments. The article brought Pemberton national recognition. In 1945, as the war ended, he secured a major government grant to establish a cardiac research laboratory at Metropolitan General. In 1946, he was featured in the Philadelphia Inquirer, __quote, _31 __. The article included a photograph of Pemberton in his white coat, stethoscope around his neck, standing beside the hospital's new electrocardiogram machine, purchased with the government grant. The article praised his dedication, his innovation, his leadership during wartime when many physicians had been drafted. It mentioned his published research, his teaching responsibilities, his service on medical boards. It did not mention Virgil Kowalski, Lenore Fairchild, or the events of March 1943. Lenore read the article. Edith had brought in the newspaper, laid it on the counter without comment. Lenore looked at Pemberton's photograph. He'd aged slightly, had acquired a distinguished gray at his temples, looked prosperous and confident. She read the entire article carefully, put down the newspaper, continued filling prescriptions. Felt nothing. The absence of feeling wasn't peace. It was numbness, a protective shell she'd built deliberately. Edith watched her and said quietly, "Someday, the truth comes out. Maybe not today, maybe not soon, but eventually." Lenore didn't respond. In 1947, Lenore's mother died, diabetic complications leading to kidney failure. The decline was gradual, increasing weakness, decreasing appetite, growing confusion. Lenore cared for her at home as long as possible, but finally hospitalized her at Jefferson Hospital when the symptoms became unmanageable. Her mother died on August 3, 1947, at 4:22 a.m. Lenore was beside her bed, holding her hand. Her mother's last words were, quote, 33. The funeral was small. 7 people attended. Lenore arranged everything efficiently, settled the estate, moved to a smaller apartment on Wayne Avenue, a 1-bedroom, $30 per month, half the size of the previous place. She donated most of her mother's belongings to church charities, kept only a few photographs, her mother's Bible, and a quilted blanket her mother had made during the Depression. The apartment felt empty, but emptiness was easier than memory. The years passed. 1948, 1949. Lenore continued working at Cheltenham Pharmacy. She was promoted to senior pharmacy assistant, though the title meant little. The staff was small and informal. Her salary increased to $85 per month. She was 48 years old. She looked older. Her hair had gone gray, her face had developed deep lines, her hands showed the tremor of early arthritis. Customers still requested her assistance, still trusted her expertise. But she remained emotionally distant, professionally competent but personally unreachable. Edith occasionally tried to engage her in conversation beyond work topics, invited her to holiday dinners, suggested social activities. Lenore declined politely. Her life had contracted to work and solitude. She had no friends, only acquaintances, no hobbies, only routines, no hopes, only habits. In 1949, Dr. Pemberton reached another milestone. He was appointed to the board of directors at Metropolitan General Hospital. His photograph appeared in the hospital newsletter, older now, fully gray, wearing an expensive suit, shaking hands with the hospital's chairman. The caption read, "Distinguished physician assumes leadership role." The article detailed his accomplishments: 25 years of service, numerous publications, successful research grants, mentorship of dozens of young physicians. It mentioned that he was being considered for presidency of the Philadelphia County Medical Society. Lenore saw the newsletter. A copy had been left in the pharmacy by a customer who worked at Metropolitan General. She looked at Pemberton's photograph, felt the same numbness, put the newsletter in the trash, continued working. February 19, 1950. Sunday. Lenore's day off. She spent the morning cleaning her apartment, did laundry, shopped for groceries. The rationing had ended, but some items were still expensive. She returned home around 2 p.m., made lunch, read for an hour. At 3:30 p.m., she decided to go to the pharmacy. Edith had mentioned that inventory needed organizing, and Sunday afternoon was quiet, a good time for tasks that required concentration. She arrived at the pharmacy at 4 p.m. Edith was surprised to see her, but grateful for the help. They worked together organizing the back storage room, checking expiration dates, rotating stock. At 4:40 p.m., the telephone rang. Edith was in the back room, elbow deep in a box of outdated medications. Lenore answered, "Cheltenham Pharmacy, how may I help you?" A man's voice. __quote _36 ___. Lenore recognized the voice instantly. 7 years. 7 years since March 15th, 1943. 7 years since she'd heard that voice pronounce her guilty, destroy her career, end her life in nursing. Dr. Harlan Pemberton. Her hand tightened on the receiver. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Pemberton's voice again. Quote 37. Lenore made a decision in that moment. She could hang up, could claim the line was disconnected, could ask Edith to take the call, or she could speak. She chose to speak. She said slowly, clearly, with perfect enunciation, __quote _38 __. The silence on the other end was absolute and profound. Not breathing silence, not waiting silence, shocked silence, recognition silence, terror silence. Lenore continued in the same calm, professional tone. Quote 39. The silence continued for another 5 seconds. Then, Pemberton's voice, completely different now, higher, uncertain, stripped of authority. Miss Fairchild? Lenore. Yes, doctor. I've been working at Cheltenham Pharmacy since June 1943. Is there anything else you need to verify about your daughter's prescription? Another pause. Then, no, that's all. Thank you. The line disconnected. Lenore placed the receiver back on its cradle carefully. Her hand was perfectly steady. Her breathing was even. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, no vindication. Just cold, clear certainty. The truth hadn't vanished. It had been waiting. 7 years. Patient. Inevitable. And now it had surfaced. Edith emerged from the back room a moment later, saw Lenore standing by the telephone, asked, Quote 43. Lenore said, Quote 44. But Edith had known Lenore for 7 years, had learned to read the subtle signs. Something had shifted. Some invisible barrier had cracked. She asked, Quote 45. Lenore met her eyes and said, Quote 46. Quote. Edith understood immediately. She said, Quote 47. Quote. Lenore was quiet for a long moment. Then, Quote 48. Quote. That evening, Lenore didn't go home. She went to the Philadelphia Public Library, arriving 15 minutes before closing at 6 p.m. She requested access to medical directories and hospital records. The reference librarian, a woman named Dorothy Chen, no relation to Dr. Marcus Chen, another coincidence, was helpful. Lenore explained that she needed contact information for filing a formal complaint with the Pennsylvania State Medical Board. Dorothy, experienced in navigating bureaucratic systems, provided the necessary forms and addresses. Lenore checked out a medical directory, took it home, spent the entire evening preparing her documentation. She worked methodically, creating a timeline of events from March 14th to 15th, 1943. She listed specific details. Patient name, Virgil Kowalski. Date and time of admission, March 14th, 11:17 p.m. Prescribed medication and dosage, digitalis 50 milligrams. Actual medication administered, digitalis 500 milligrams. 5 tablets of 100 milligrams each, she corrected her own memory. Time of cardiac crisis, 11:47 p.m. Time of cardiac arrest, March 15th, 12:41 a.m. Duration of arrest, 3 minutes 40 seconds. Location of empty medication bottle, procedure room counter. Forged initials in medication log, LF, not matching her authentic handwriting. Fabricated witness, janitor Kozlowski. Falsified handwriting analysis, Dr. Edmund Wexler. She included names of people who had witnessed the truth but remained silent. Dr. Marcus Chen, resident physician who documented the case. Patricia Brennan, night nurse who found the empty bottle. Constance Rutherford, director of nursing who voted for her termination. Eugene Rafferty, union representative who failed to defend her. Wallace Brennan, hospital administrator who accepted Pemberton's version. And 37 other hospital employees who'd been present at the disciplinary hearing. She attached copies of her employment record, her termination letter, her nursing credentials from Temple University, and character references from Edith Haverford and several pharmacy customers. She wrote clearly, factually, without emotional language. No accusations of malice, no claims of personal vendetta. Just facts, dates, names, events. A clinical case report. She finished at 2:30 a.m. on February 20th, 1950. She had written 17 pages in her precise handwriting. She sealed the document in an envelope, addressed it to the Pennsylvania State Medical Board, Professional Misconduct Division, Harrisburg. She walked to the post office at 8 a.m. and sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. The Pennsylvania State Medical Board received her complaint on February 23, 1950. It was logged, assigned case number 847/50, and forwarded to the investigative division. The initial reviewer was Dr. Margaret Ashworth, a 63-year-old physician who'd spent 30 years investigating professional misconduct. Dr. Ashworth had reviewed thousands of complaints. The vast majority were frivolous. Some were legitimate but unprovable. A handful were both legitimate and provable. She read Lenore's 17-page complaint once quickly, then slowly and carefully. The level of detail was extraordinary. The specificity of dates, times, medical terminology, procedural details suggested someone with genuine medical knowledge and direct involvement. The absence of emotional language was striking. Most complainants wrote angry, rambling accusations. This was different. This was clinical documentation. Dr. Ashworth opened a formal investigation file. On March 1, 1950, Dr. Ashworth arrived unannounced at Metropolitan General Hospital at 9 a.m. She presented her credentials to the reception desk, requested to speak with the hospital administrator. Wallace Brennan was summoned. Dr. Ashworth explained that she was investigating a complaint of professional misconduct from 1943 and required access to patient records, personnel files, and medication logs. Brennan initially refused, citing patient confidentiality and hospital policy. Dr. Ashworth produced a court order signed by a judge in Harrisburg. Brennan had no choice but to comply. He summoned the records department, instructed them to provide full cooperation. Dr. Ashworth requested specifically all records related to patient Virgil Kowalski from March 14 to 15, 1943. Personnel file for Lenore Fairchild. Personnel file for Dr. Harlan Pemberton. Medication logs from the cardiac ward for March 1943. Disciplinary hearing records from March 15, 1943. The investigation lasted 4 months and 17 days. Dr. Ashworth was thorough, meticulous, relentless. She interviewed 47 people. Hospital staff from 1943, current employees, patients who'd been on the cardiac ward that night, pharmaceutical suppliers, handwriting experts, medical consultants. She examined the medication log from March 14 to 15, 1943, under magnification and ultraviolet light. The tampering was visible. The original entry had been scratched out with a blade. The paper showed scoring and fiber damage. The replacement ink was chemically different from the original ink. The __quote _49 _ initials showed hesitation marks inconsistent with authentic handwriting. She sent the log to 3 independent forensic document examiners. All 3 concluded forgery. All 3 identified characteristics consistent with Dr. Pemberton's known handwriting, attempting to replicate Lenore Fairchild's initials. She located Dr. Marcus Chen, now a cardiologist in Pittsburgh. He'd kept copies of his original documentation from the Kowalski case, against hospital policy but common practice among careful physicians. His notes were detailed and damning. 11:47 p.m. Patient Kowalski shows signs of digitalis toxicity, severe arrhythmias. Checked medication log, shows 50 milligrams administered by Dr. Pemberton. Found empty 500 milligram bottle in procedure room. Discrepancy noted. Patient deteriorated rapidly. Cardiac arrest 12:41 a.m. Successful resuscitation 12:44:47 a.m. Informed Dr. Pemberton upon his return approximately 1:30 a.m. He took possession of empty bottle, stated he would investigate. Dr. Chen's documentation proved that Pemberton had known about the error immediately, had taken the physical evidence, had had opportunity to alter records before Lenore arrived for her morning shift. Dr. Ashworth tracked down the supposed witness, janitor Kozlowski. He'd left Metropolitan General in 1945, moved to Pittsburgh for better-paying work in steel mills. She traveled to Pittsburgh, interviewed him at his home. He admitted immediately, "I lied." Dr. Pemberton called me into his office the morning of the hearing, said there'd been a medication error and they needed to determine who was responsible. He asked if I'd seen Miss Fairchild in the building that evening. I said no, I'd been working on the first floor. He said I must have seen her, that sometimes we see people without remembering clearly. He suggested that maybe I'd seen someone who looked like Miss Fairchild, and later it turned out it was her. He made it sound like I was helping establish facts, not fabricating testimony. I signed a statement. I've regretted it ever since. Dr. Ashworth obtained a sworn affidavit. She investigated the handwriting analyst, Dr. Edmund Wexler, whose report had supposedly proven the forged initials were Lenore's. She discovered that Wexler had died in 1947, but his widow still lived in Philadelphia. The widow revealed that her husband had been a dentist, not a document examiner. He'd sometimes done informal handwriting comparisons for friends, but had no credentials or training. He'd been a patient of Dr. Pemberton's, had been treated for cardiac arrhythmia in 1942. The widow provided her husband's personal papers, which included a draft of the quote 52 with Pemberton's handwritten notes in the margins. Make this sound more definitive, and add technical terminology. The entire analysis had been fabricated at Pemberton's direction. She located Virgil Kowalski. He was now 63 years old, still working at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, still alive 7 years after nearly dying. She interviewed him extensively. His memory of that night was vivid. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 55, underscore, underscore, underscore. Dr. Ashworth obtained his sworn testimony. She interviewed the 42 hospital employees who'd been present at Lenore's disciplinary hearing. One by one, she asked them what they knew, what they'd witnessed, why they'd remained silent. The answers varied in details but converged on a single theme: fear. Fear of Pemberton's authority, fear of losing their jobs, fear of being ostracized, fear of becoming the next scapegoat. Constance Rutherford, the director of nursing, admitted, "I knew Lenore hadn't been on duty that night. I knew the initials in the log looked wrong. But Dr. Pemberton was chief of medicine, and the hospital administrator supported him. If I'd spoken up, I would have been dismissed too. I made a cowardly choice. I've lived with that guilt every day since." Eugene Rafferty, the union representative, said, "My job was to defend union members. I failed completely. I let politics and fear override my responsibility." One by one, they confessed their complicity. On June 15, 1950, Dr. Ashworth submitted her report to the Pennsylvania State Medical Board. The report was 347 pages, organized into 12 sections. Executive summary, timeline of events, medical records analysis, forensic document examination, witness testimony, interview transcripts, physical evidence, expert consultant reports, background investigation, regulatory violations, conclusions, and recommendations. The findings were comprehensive and damning. Dr. Harlan Pemberton had administered a lethal overdose of digitalis to patient Virgil Kowalski on March 14, 1943, due to negligent failure to verify medication dosage, had recognized his error upon returning to the hospital, had deliberately altered medical records to conceal the error, had forged nursing staff initials to shift blame, had fabricated expert testimony, had suborned perjury from hospital employees, had orchestrated the wrongful termination of an innocent nurse. The report concluded that Pemberton's actions constituted professional misconduct of the most serious nature, representing a pattern of deception, abuse of authority, and patient endangerment. Recommendations: immediate interim suspension of Dr. Pemberton's medical license pending full disciplinary hearing. Criminal investigation for fraud and perjury. Reinstatement of Miss Lenore Fairchild's nursing credentials with full clearing of her record. Investigation into Metropolitan General Hospital's administrative oversight and disciplinary procedures. Civil litigation support for both Kowalski and Fairchild. The medical board reviewed the report on June 22, 1950. The vote was unanimous to proceed with all recommendations. Dr. Pemberton was notified by certified letter on June 23. His medical license was suspended effective immediately. The formal disciplinary hearing was scheduled for September 11 to 16, 1950. The hearing took place in a Philadelphia courtroom, selected because the anticipated attendance exceeded the capacity of the medical board's usual hearing room. Present were 12 medical board members, 3 state prosecutors, 2 defense attorneys representing Pemberton, 1 attorney representing Metropolitan General Hospital, 42 witnesses, numerous observers including newspaper reporters, medical professionals, and former colleagues. The courtroom had seating for 150 people. All seats were filled every day. Dr. Pemberton appeared on the first day in an expensive gray suit, initially confident, accompanied by his attorneys, one from a prestigious Philadelphia law firm, one specializing in medical malpractice defense. His wife and 3 children sat in the front row. His attorneys had prepared a vigorous defense. The evidence was circumstantial. The investigation was biased against physicians. Miss Fairchild had fabricated the complaint out of vindictiveness after a legitimate termination. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive. Witnesses were unreliable after 7 years. Medical errors happen and don't constitute misconduct when handled appropriately. The prosecution began methodically. Day 1. Establishing timeline and medical facts. Expert testimony from cardiologists about digitalis toxicity, appropriate dosing, symptoms of overdose, survival statistics. Virgil Kowalski testified, describing his experience, identifying Pemberton as the physician who'd administered the injection. Medical records were presented showing the progression of his condition, the cardiac arrest, the emergency treatment. Day 2. Forensic document analysis. 3 independent examiners testified, displayed magnified photographs of the medication log showing the scratched-out original entry, the different ink chemistry, the forged initials with hesitation marks and pressure inconsistencies. Side-by-side comparisons of the forged __quote_58_ and authenticated samples of Lenore's genuine handwriting. The differences were visible even to non-experts. Day 3. Witness testimony from hospital employees. Dr. Marcus Chen described his documentation, his conversation with Pemberton at 1:30 a.m., Pemberton taking possession of the evidence. Patricia Brennan described finding the empty 500 milligram bottle. One by one, the 42 employees who'd witnessed Lenore's hearing testified about what they'd known and why they'd remained silent. Day 4. The fabricated evidence. Kozlowski testified about being pressured to provide false testimony. Dr. Wexler's widow testified about her husband's lack of credentials and Pemberton's direction in creating the fraudulent handwriting analysis. Documentary evidence showing Wexler was a dentist with no training in forensic document examination. Day 5. Lenore Fairchild testified. She spoke calmly, precisely, for 3 hours. Described her 18-year career without a single prior error, the events of March 14th to 15th, the disciplinary hearing, the impact on her life. Cross-examination attempted to suggest bitterness and revenge as motives. She responded, __quote_59__. Day 6. Dr. Pemberton took the stand against his attorney's advice. He believed he could explain, could use his credentials and authority to sway the board. It was a catastrophic mistake. Under cross-examination, he contradicted himself repeatedly, claimed memory failures about some details while providing suspiciously precise recollections of others. Couldn't explain the forensic evidence. Couldn't explain why multiple witnesses were lying. Couldn't explain his possession of the incriminating bottle. The prosecutor, Assistant State Attorney Ruth Kellerman, destroyed him systematically. Every answer he gave created new problems. When asked directly, quote, 60, he hesitated too long before denying it. When asked, quote, 61, he became defensive and evasive. When confronted with Dr. Chen's contemporaneous documentation, he claimed Chen must have been mistaken. When reminded that Chen's notes had saved Kowalski's life, he had no response. The medical board deliberated for 3 hours and 14 minutes. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of professional negligence resulting in patient endangerment. Guilty of falsification of medical records. Guilty of subordination of perjury. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of abuse of professional authority. Guilty of conduct unbecoming a physician. The punishment was severe and comprehensive. Permanent revocation of medical license in Pennsylvania with recommendation for reciprocal revocation in all states. Prohibition from any employment in healthcare. 5 years probation. Restitution to Virgil Kowalski for medical expenses and suffering totaling $8,470. Restitution to Lenore Fairchild for lost wages and damages totaling $12,000. Public apology to both victims to be published in the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Journal of the American Medical Association. Criminal referral to the Philadelphia District Attorney for potential prosecution for fraud and perjury. Metropolitan General Hospital received a separate censure. Negligent oversight, failure to properly investigate misconduct allegations, inadequate disciplinary procedures. The hospital was ordered to reinstate Ms. Fairchild's employment record as __quote_62__, to expunge all negative references, to pay 7 years of back salary calculated at her final nursing rate, $127 per month, totaling $10,668, plus an additional $5,000 in punitive damages. The hospital administrator, Wallace Brennan, was removed from his position. The director of nursing, Constance Rutherford, submitted her resignation. The hospital issued a formal public apology. On October 12, 1950, Lenore received multiple certified letters. From Metropolitan General, offer of full reinstatement as head nurse of cardiology at current rates, plus all back pay and damages, total $15,668. Personal letter from new Chief of Medicine Dr. Eleanor Winters, expressing profound regret and hoping Miss Fairchild would consider returning. From Pennsylvania State Medical Board, official notification that her nursing credentials had been cleared, all misconduct allegations expunged, professional reputation fully restored. From the court, notification that Dr. Pemberton's restitution payment of $12,000 had been processed and would be dispersed within 30 days. Lenore read each letter carefully. She calculated the money, more than she'd earned in the 7 years at the pharmacy, enough to live comfortably for years. She imagined returning to Metropolitan General, working in cardiology again, wearing the white uniform again. She felt nothing. No desire, no satisfaction, no sense of victory. She wrote back to Metropolitan General. __quote _63 __. The hospital complied. Her record was corrected. The money was donated. She kept only the $5,000 in damages, enough to provide security but not wealth. Dr. Pemberton's fall was swift and comprehensive. The Philadelphia Inquirer published the verdict on September 18, 1950. Prominent physician stripped of license after 7-year cover-up. The story was picked up nationally. New York Times, Washington Post, medical journals. Pemberton became a cautionary tale, a symbol of medical arrogance and institutional corruption. His photograph appeared with the articles, the same distinguished image from the 1946 feature, now captioned, "Disgraced Former Doctor." His career ended instantly. No hospital would employ him in any capacity. No research institution would accept him. No pharmaceutical company would hire him as a consultant. His medical knowledge was worthless without a license. His reputation was destroyed beyond recovery. His personal life collapsed in parallel. His wife filed for divorce in November 1950, citing emotional distress and financial hardship. The divorce was finalized in March 1951. His 3 children, ages 17, 15, and 12, were advised by their mother to use her maiden name to avoid association with their father's disgrace. 2 of them did. Pemberton moved from his house in Chestnut Hill to a small apartment in South Philadelphia, a working-class neighborhood far from his former social circles. He was 50 years old, unemployable in his profession, socially ostracized, financially diminished by legal fees and restitution payments. He found work as a pharmacy stock clerk. Ironic, given Lenore's employment, earning $40 per week. Later, he worked as a medical equipment salesman, insurance claims processor, bookkeeper for a medical supply company. Anonymous jobs where his background wouldn't be discovered. He lived alone, quietly, invisibly. On October 8, 1963, Dr. Harlan Pemberton suffered a massive myocardial infarction while walking to work at 8:15 a.m. He collapsed on the sidewalk at the corner of Broad and South Streets. A passerby called an ambulance. Pemberton was transported to Pennsylvania Hospital, ironically where he'd once been department head. He arrived in the emergency room at 8:47 a.m. He was pronounced dead at 9:03 a.m. He was 62 years old. The death certificate listed acute myocardial infarction as cause of death. No autopsy was performed. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was 3 sentences. Harlan Pemberton, former physician, died October 8, 1963, age 62, of heart attack. Preceded in death by parents. No services scheduled. No survivors. No mention of his medical career, his publications, his former position. Just 3 sentences. His body was cremated. No funeral. No one attended the cremation except the mortuary staff. Lenore continued working at Cheltenham Pharmacy until 1968. Edith Haverford retired that year at age 80, sold the business to a young pharmacist who wanted to modernize, install new equipment, appeal to younger customers. The new owner politely suggested that Lenore, now 68 years old, might want to consider retirement. The suggestion was kind but clear. Lenore had been working for 25 years since her dismissal from Metropolitan General, 43 years total in healthcare. She was tired. Her arthritis had worsened, her eyesight was failing, her hands trembled when filling prescriptions. She accepted a small pension, $50 per month, enough to supplement her savings. She retired in June 1968. She lived quietly in her 1-bedroom apartment on Wayne Avenue. Her days were simple, structured, solitary. She read medical journals, nursing textbooks, mystery novels, Philadelphia newspapers. She walked 2 miles every morning when weather permitted, along Germantown Avenue, through Fairmount Park. She attended church occasionally, the same Lutheran church her mother had attended, though Lenore remained skeptical of divine justice. She had few social connections. Most of her former colleagues had retired, moved away, died. She had no close friends, only polite acquaintances, the woman who ran the corner grocery, the mailman who delivered her pension checks, neighbors who nodded in passing. She never married again. She had no children, no grandchildren, no family except distant cousins she hadn't seen in decades. In July 1979, she suffered a stroke. Moderate severity, left-side paralysis, slurred speech, cognitive impairment. She was hospitalized at Einstein Medical Center for 2 weeks, transferred to rehabilitation for another month. She recovered partial function, but could no longer live independently. She moved to Germantown Manor, a nursing home with decent care and reasonable rates, $380 per month, covered by her pension and savings. She lived there for 14 years. Her room was small, 1 bed, 1 chair, 1 window overlooking a parking lot. She kept few possessions, photographs of her parents, her nursing school graduation photo, the quilted blanket her mother had made, a small shelf of books. Visitors were rare. A cousin from Pittsburgh came twice a year at Christmas and Easter. Edith Haverford visited occasionally until her death in 1983. A former pharmacy colleague named Ruth Kellerman stopped by on Lenore's birthday each year until moving to Florida in 1987. The nursing home staff found Lenore pleasant but distant, cooperative but emotionally detached. She followed routines without complaint, took medications without resistance, attended activities without enthusiasm. She rarely spoke about her past. When asked about her career, she said simply, "I was a nurse for 18 years, then worked in a pharmacy for 25 years." No elaboration, no stories, no bitterness, just facts. The staff assumed she'd lived an ordinary, unremarkable life. They didn't know about Metropolitan General, Dr. Pemberton, the 7-year wait, the vindication. They knew only that she was a quiet, elderly woman who caused no trouble and received few visitors. On March 15, 1993, exactly 50 years after that morning in the conference room, Lenore Fairchild died of pneumonia at age 93. The nursing home staff found her at 6:20 a.m. during morning rounds. She had died peacefully in her sleep, no apparent distress, no suffering. The death certificate listed pneumonia secondary to cerebrovascular disease as the cause. 7 people attended her funeral. The cousin from Pittsburgh, 2 former pharmacy colleagues, 3 neighbors from her apartment building years ago who'd seen the obituary. The service was brief, 20 minutes at the Lutheran Church, burial at Mount Peace Cemetery beside her parents. The obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was 6 sentences. __quote _70 __. No mention of the medical board hearing. No mention of Dr. Pemberton. No mention of the wrongful termination and 7-year vindication. Just 6 sentences summarizing 93 years. She was buried in a simple grave, a modest headstone. __quote _71 __. Within a year, the grass had grown over the grave. Within 5 years, no one visited. Within 10 years, the nursing home had closed, the pharmacy had changed owners 3 times. Metropolitan General had merged with another hospital system and demolished the building where the 1943 events occurred. The people who knew her story had died or forgotten. History had moved on. But there is one detail worth preserving. February 19, 1950, 4:40 p.m., the moment Dr. Pemberton heard her name on the telephone and realized his past had caught up with him. That pause, that silence, that recognition. In that moment, 7 years of lies collapsed. In that moment, he understood that truth doesn't disappear, it waits. And in that moment, Lenore understood that patience is a form of power. She hadn't needed immediate vindication, she'd needed certain vindication. And she got it. That's the real lesson of this story. Not that revenge is sweet, not that good always triumphs, but that truth is inevitable. It can be delayed, suppressed, buried, but it doesn't vanish. It waits in the shadows, in the archives, in the memories of those who know. And when the right moment comes, a telephone call, a chance meeting, a formal investigation, it emerges. Sometimes after 7 years, sometimes after 70, but it emerges. Because facts are stubborn things. Because lies require constant maintenance while truth requires only patience. Because people who build their lives on deception live in constant fear that the foundation will crack. Pemberton died with that fear. Died knowing his life's work had been reduced to 3 sentences in an obituary, knowing his children used a different name, knowing he'd be remembered only as a cautionary tale about medical corruption. Lenore died with peace. Died knowing she'd told the truth, knowing she'd vindicated herself, knowing she'd protected future patients from a physician who valued his career over their safety. That's the difference. That's the entire moral. Not fame, not recognition, not public memory, but how you feel when you close your eyes for the last time. Shame or peace, fear or calm, regret or acceptance. Lenore closed her eyes with acceptance. Pemberton closed his with regret. And that, in the end, is the only justice that truly matters. Not what the medical board decreed, not what the newspapers reported, not what history remembers, but what each person carried in their final moments. The truth they knew about themselves, the choices they'd made, the consequences they'd earned. The Pennsylvania State Medical Board maintains file number 847/50 in climate-controlled storage in Harrisburg. 347 pages documenting one woman's fight for vindication and one man's catastrophic fall. The file is rarely accessed. The last request was in 1995 from a medical ethics researcher. It will probably never be requested again. The people involved are all dead now. The hospital has been demolished. The pharmacy has changed owners. The neighborhood has changed. Philadelphia has changed. America has changed. But the lesson remains. Truth waits. Justice delayed is still justice. Silence has consequences. Courage has rewards. And the choices we make in crisis define us more than any credential, any position, any reputation. Lenore Fairchild made the right choice. Not in 1943 when she had no choice to make, but in 1950 when she finally had power and used it not for revenge, but for justice. That's what mattered. That's what this story teaches. That's what deserves to be remembered, even if no one remembers.